Well, we're live on a Sunday. Oh my God. Hello there. Hi there. It's about to start now. It's about starting. I'm no scheduled time. This is not a new no, this is an extra thing. It's getting around 5 o'clock. It's about 10 minutes to five here in Warsaw, but it's about just about 11 Eastern Standard Time, and this is brunch. So, welcome everyone to I could say, messing around on a Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon. How do we do it? Sunday morning. Those of you in the Pacific thing, or you're going to be here, and those of you in America, it's late morning, early afternoon. It's starting out morning. It's just hitting around 11 o'clock Eastern time, a little bit 12 o'clock over in eastern provinces of Canada. Um, Good morning over there in America. Hi. We'll see how this is. I'm experimenting. This is something I'm doing. I was doing some recording. I did one recording. I finished my show today. I have one more chapter, the last chapter for so to do, and I should be doing that, but I want to take a break, and I decided to do this, to live stream. I was gonna try using. I was going to try to use a live. What do you call? Good day, sir. Truth over lies. Hi there. I was going to try to use a white screen on here, but I don't know how to do it. Ooh. Well, good morning on a Sunday. Good morning over there. Those of you in Europe, UK, it's afternoon. It's late after the evening. It's more kind of early dinner, and this time my wife's probably saying, "Why don't you come home for dinner?" Blah 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 blah. Okay, whatever. I did my Friday live stream, and then last week I did a Saturday live stream to make up for the mistake of my disaster of my Friday being screwed up because of internet problems at my the place I was staying at. And I came back here on Saturday morning, got here back here Saturday afternoon, and I was able to host the live stream. You're probably catch up. But this past Friday went well. As you know, I'm still doing the recordings. We're doing Schmidt. I did Schmidt all day yesterday. I had a monster. It was a 2 hour recording. It's like, oh my god, a chapter. I divided the chapter to do it like no more than an hour, 40 minutes at most, 30 minutes at most. But it was just a little too long in that sense. So, and it's not even the full chapter in that sense. Schmidt is, and I mean, one of the things I'm learning with Schmidt is, you can see how Schmidt is a brilliant scholar, and this is the problem. Usually when we look at texts of political philosophy, when I do this, it's not really scholarship; it's really thinking ideas. Well, Schmidt is so deep, thick in terms of the historical evidence. The evidence just overwhelms you to a great degree, much more than, let's say, Montesquieu or Rousseau. And the Schmidt Dictatorship for me, has been a very shocking book. I've read it before, but now when reading it aloud to you guys and talking about it in detail, um, I'm getting kind of I'm noticing problems with the translation. I didn't notice when I read it. When I first got I looked at this translation, and it was a marvel. It was the fact the first translation in English of this dictatorship, and dictatorship has long been needed to be translated in English. And I was asked to review it I reviewed it for political studies in the UK, and I wrote the review. I praised the I praised the edition because it's a good edition. It's very good. Polity Press did a good edition. But now, as I'm really paying attention close to it, doing the presentation here, yes, I'm using my Google Books version, the Google Books version, not the PDF. But there's not many errors. There's not, yes, in Google Book there's errors in it, but it's not as bad as normal in the other editions. But I've been noticing some the translator's choice of words I would disagree with in some things of Schmidt. They're kind of too liberal in that sense. They're kind of too politically correct. That's the problem. It's too much deferment to our sensitivities. The translator was. It's an academic. It was written done by a nice academic, but being a nice academic trying to fit in an academy, I think some of her word choices mask some of the what's in the German in some degree. And when I was looking at trying to find a good copy of the German, and I looked at it. I know there's a good copy of this by Beck. I put that on my. It's the picture of the cover is on the that I don't. My copy of Dictatorship of German was long lost, and now I'm looking and saying I probably have to get it. But it's so expensive, the German edition, the Beck German edition. So I remembered it. I went to find out I had a copy, but I can't find it in my chaos of my books. No, I think I know what happened to it. It got lost. I had it in America. It did not come with me to. I didn't bring it with me the first time, and when I moved, I don't think it. I think somebody at home took it, or someone I knew may have kept it or something. I didn't realize I didn't get back when I came over here in '99 because it wasn't in my with the other one book editions. And remember, the English translation only came available like 2010. So therefore, I was in Poland and Europe when it came out. So the so that has been kind of what I've been frustrating with as doing this. Is one of the big frustrations of doing these kind of videos is I'm not a video maker. I'm not a video essayist. I know academic agent was talking about how the great video is. I can't do video editing because I don't know how to use the things. I'm not good at that. I'm doing the kind of sticks, hex, and hammers style of video talking, and I'm not talking about news, I'm talking about issues. But at the same time, I'm doing it as a teacher would do. Been doing the thing as how I would have a tutorial with the student in that sense. So that is the nature of the videos have been doing with that. So therefore, this has been the theme. Why am I doing it today? Well, I'm doing a general theme. I want to talk about something I've been working on. Well, I mean, I've been a little frustrated because Saturday morning I got my negative. I'm a little annoyed at the journal. It's been, they received it over like 50 days ago. Okay. I know American journals. This was an American journal. This is a relatively important journal for political theory. It's not like it's like it is it is the thing. It is prestigious. It was okay. It's not one of the big political science journals. It's not like the superstar journals like APSR or JP, but it's for political theory. It is one. It is one of the leading journals. You could say maybe even the journal itself, political theory, right? It's highly selective, so it gets lots and lots of things. And of course, now because of the nature of academic publishing, particularly at big journals, and that are being inundated by all the scholars through the world of getting articles submitted. What's happening is peer review is dead. Peer review has actually been fundamentally crushed. Two sides, because one, the amount of articles, a journal, a big prestigious journals is getting 50,000 to 50 to 80,000 articles a year, a significant amount. It's not just 1 or 2,000, it's tens of thousands and 20s of thousands, because the whole world is trying to publish in it. So what's happening is they're getting inundated, and they only have maybe about let's say 50. They have like 5 issues. A journal has 4 issues. So most journals only have four issues. Some journals only have 2 or 3, and they do 20. If they do 10, 15 to 20 each, that'll be 60 issues. And if they're hit with 1,000 journals, so that just did the math, do the ratio. A journal like a Star Prestige things, we're getting 30,000 that hit. Well, you have 30,000 applicants, so 30,000 applicants in a year, approximately, but only, let's say, 50, maybe 70 slots, under 100 slots a year. Could you just do the ratio? It's very difficult. It's a very difficult statistic. So and that is simply not. They simply just could not send everything to, because there's not enough. The reviewers would be, I mean, a problem with people who are asked to be reviewers for this just don't want to do it anymore. You don't get paid for it. They don't give you money for it. You don't get something. It's considered it's your obligation as a scholar. It's professional duty. I know some European journals do pay people things, and there's sometimes journals will give you if they're signed with a press, they might give you a $30 card. Like I know one journal gave me a $30. I never used it because I just didn't have the chance to use the the card to buy from the press, the University of Chicago Press at the time. I just didn't. There was no book I wanted, and you have to order from the press and shipping. The shipping here alone would it wouldn't be. I'd have to pay a little more money just for the shipping. About $10 to $15 shipping costs now. So it's like I get a book, but okay, it'll be about I'd have to pay $10 extra, and I just didn't have the money dollars to actually do it so quickly. So I let it go. Okay, so there's no pay for it. There's nothing like this. So what happens is that there's a kind of collapse of it. What's happening is people don't want to do it. They call it reviewer fatigue. And what happens is in the old days, I mean, it was easy to get. Now today, only they say, oh, only 30%, but really only 30% of things go to the reviewer. So what happens in most reviewing today in academic journals is the editors make cuts. The initial cut is the initial entry of this. They'll find reasons to do it, and then the things that they think they might send, they'll put over to another meeting of an editorial board, and they will decide whether they will send it. They'll vote on sending it to the second. And so what happened was usually if they're good, if the editorial team is organized and good, this usually mean 1 week or 2 weeks. You notice if they're going to desk reject you. And by desk rejection means the editorial board rejects you prior to any peer review. Okay. Right now, honestly, it's about above 50% for most journals in America. That is probably, they say, no, only 30%. Bullshit. I'm calling the bullshit. This is, there's no way, given the ratio of numbers they're reporting in their reports, there's no way that they don't have the ability to send out the Scott. They really don't. And the danger is back when I was a younger student, when I was a young grad student and starting in the profession back in the 90s, I used to get reviewed. Now I don't get past the desk review. When I was a worse writer, when I was younger and didn't really know a lot, I had a better chance of getting past the editor and getting a actual desk peer review. In the 10 articles that I sent out, and a couple of them got published, they were like, and the criticisms that I actually got something and learned something from it. One article I met, the reviewer even mentioned their name and said, please contact me, even though they thought I should rewrite the thing totally. Like this is one of the dangers of peer review now, is that often peer review was that reviewers didn't read, often tried to criticize this is one of the bad habits of peer review, is that what ends up happening is the reviewer says, well, this is not the way I write it, so you should write it the way I write it. Okay, that's bad. It's not. I have never done that with a reviewer. There's only 1-2 times where I had a review and I said, no, I don't like it because the way he did it. I say that, but I still, if it still had if I thought it was still reasonably as a good argument, I would still recommend publishing. But I might say I disagree with it, and I disagree for these reasons. But I think the argument that they made is plausible in a sense. Other scholars might agree with it, and therefore there's this idea. But a lot of time the reviewers say, no, this is not what I wouldn't write it this way, and they nitpick answers. I've gotten when I've gotten peer review lately, I got like one or two. It went that way. It was just nitpicking. I got two peer reviews recently, and that was rare. Okay, this was like, oh my god! And the journal I did it was not one of the premier journals too, so it went through one of the minor journals, and I got the back to the thing, and it was nitpicking. It was all the review that they gave. It was microscopic nitpicking because I wasn't arguing it the way the reviewer wanted you to write, and that's just frustrating, given how hard selection is in journals. That to get that kind of feedback back, that it's kind of this nitpicking way, then this is why peer review is kind of dying out. This is why you get this kind of situation. Young scholars don't have time to do this. They want to get published. It's hard to do, and therefore what gets published is what's trendy or something like this. So I got my article on the riddle of the middle class in Aristotle. I got it back from the journal saying, not even comments, and there were 50 days. That's how incompetent that journal was in that sense. They couldn't make it. They made a desk review, so it must have made it past the editors. They must have worked a committee, and it must have. They kept on, hedging whether they're going to send it out to peer review. But 50 days is too long. If you're going to desk reject review, if you're not going to send, because I thought it went to a reviewer. I clearly thought within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's 3 weeks since I sent it in and it was submitted. It's probably going to the reviewer because normally it gets rejected. The worst I ever had it was within 25 days. I got 25 days. Oh yeah, and even then I thought that was in bad manners, but this was completely outrageous in that sense. In that sense, that this is what I was frustrated about it, and so I was doing after one of the reasons why I only did one recording yesterday was I spent 2 hours tweaking something, trying to think about where to send it next. I send it to a classics journal that I got a bad feeling that they're not going to want it. And then I'm going to have to change all the footnotes and referencing styles to get it in a journal that I can probably get it into. And that's just pain, a lot of fuck work, in that sense. So that has been why my Saturday was like, this. And this is a real problem in the academic scholarship. And that's a thing that young scholars are going to confront with now. And this is why there's a whole series of bad, these Asian journals that are popping up in this whole parasitical industry of paying to get published. A lot of people are doing this. This is not a good thing. This is a bad habit. Europe did have that tendency. So there's a cultural difference in that. And that the fact that the elite publications are so difficult to get into, but getting it published in there now is such a prestigious requirement. And what's happening is that those who get access to, those who, those on the boards, there is incest going on at these big giant journals too. The incest is that they tend to have, they and their friends who are reviewers direct students to the journal, the people to the journals. The people who are kind of, please submit something to us. We want it. So some real big name, relatively name. In other words, the named and the established scholars get access, and that they want to. Oh yeah, this person's famous. This is going to help us get, keep the prestige of the journal. So therefore, there is some. This is the way peer review has been corrupted over time, and this is the way things like that is going on. Well, that's my gripe about because it's been frustrating today. I was, and therefore last night, I did my thing. I was just dreaming about a paper. I got no rest last night because as I was trying to fall asleep, I was actually thinking about rewriting a paper and structuring it. I have to do book 5 of the politics, and I trying to make some articles, and I'm working right now, book 5, chapter 4, on 2 issues on this, the questions of small things leading to stasis, and also the question of fraud, the very ending of chapter 4, book 5, on fraud, deceit, and this, and that's it's a very important theme, that this is a very Machiavellian theme at book 5 of fraud and consent and of force and fraud. Aris has this one, the ending, the last paragraph, last section of that chapter, because it's basically broke up into 4 themes. The first is small things, which is a significant portion, and then the middle, the 2 about the plutuma, about how the changes of this is like this. Oh yeah, the cutting out. I don't know what's going on. The signal strength is okay. I think the stream is going up and down. I don't have Wi-Fi, so this is not that. I think it's just maybe the time of the day and the signal strength. So I don't know what's going on. It'll be recorded. It'll be saved. And no. So book 5, book 4 is that really structured. Chapter 4, book 4 has this real ending. Because remember, the book 5, the first part is about change, political change, why it happens, what is the forces of it. He starts out with the 3 a general theory. He gives a general framework of how political change happens. Okay. And only, but then he talks about the triggering causes. Like, he deals with the causes of change. He deals with the kind of, I say, the material, the material causes of change. Then the motivations why change happened, teleological causes of change, and then he deals, using Aristotle's famous 4 causes. The final or teleological cause, the formal cause with the eidos, the what we call the pudding cause, or the efficient cause, or putting this is sequential, the thing that happened before it, sequential thing, and then last but not least, the matter, form, and efficient cause, or pudding cause, thing that was before it. The first thing, the last thing, formal, is left off. This is the regime. This is the politeia itself, as the cause. Therefore, the structural form of the politeia will be how the form of change. How does form affect change? Right? How does the form of this political thing? Remember, the form of the political community is the regime, politeia. This is the thing that shapes it. This is the political system. This is the regime, or the constitution. I can say constitution. People say constitution, but some translators say the constitution. But it's more understood as this, this aspect of this. And what's so interesting about the structure of this is that this general account of this you have the 3 causes, leaving out the form, because that will be. He will look at the form of change and why change happens because of the different types of regimes. He will look at that in book 5, chapter 5, 6, and 7. Where 5, he looks at the changes in looking at the democratic regime and the causes of change in it, why democratic regimes change. Then, which is interesting, the democratic. He gives, then the next is oligarchy, and then the 3rd chapter of the account of specific regimes is he addresses both so-called aristocracy and the regime called regime, and therefore he doesn't separate a so-called aristocracy with regime called regime, and that is a major. Okay, this is a major thing in that sense. So structurally, book 4 is. Chapter 4, book 4 of book 5 is kind of it looks at what happened in the first 3 chapters about the general account of this, where the chapter 3 is the elaborations of all the what we call the efficient causes, the triggering types of the causes that trigger change. Okay, so therefore you have the first cause of change is, let's say, the material, the matter. That was and it's at 3 dimensions. It's the people, the place. Then what is the next level is final. The ends, why things do. And this is the kind of, this is like the motivations, like and therefore things like honor, profit, honor and dishonor, profit, cost. these levels. Again, these first two levels have these first two things, the first two types of causes, two levels of causes in this model, um, are formulating, echoing the famous four causes. But it also echoes inside of each of those. There's at four levels. There's the level of the matter, the bodies and things. Then the next is desires, and then later is reason, or souls, or rational. So you go from the material at each one of those levels. The material, the first one is the material, deals with the bodies, then with the matter, bodies, and souls. Then what happens is, and souls means also spirit in that sense, like thumos and honor and things like this. And then we have the next level is the what we call the final causes, the goals of this. Again, this is, we said, again, at all three levels. There's the material things, utility, cost, and benefit, harm and benefit, utility, cost. Then at level honor, spirit, it's honor and dishonor, and then souls, it's truth, virtue, and vice. Right. So therefore, these are the divisions which motivate the ends why conflict happens, and conflict will lead to change in that sense. Then what we have is the efficient cause, the thing that triggers this, and it might, now this might be that there might be a disorder. Like he gives like 11, he gives about 11 that expands, like 7 first, then it expands to 11, and then he goes, and that's all chapter 3. Chapter 3 he elaborates on that. Now there's the very last part section of chapter 2. He gives the 7 and then 11 of the triggering causes. These starting points and the causes. Okay, the causes and arche starting points. Why is this is interesting? Because, well, this is the system. This is the regime model. And 4 is so interesting because it's like, okay, I've already discussed these things, but I need to talk about small things right off the bat. Then I need to talk about the two levels of distortion of Latuma. And then the last part of it is this discussion about, well, you can do this, you can bring change, you can initiate change or some action by either force or fraud. Force or fraud. I can do it by or persuasion, and I can do it either at the beginning or the end. And that's a very interesting point where this is the first time in the politics the discussion of, well, persuasion and fraud and violence is clearly dissimulated, and this very much echoes the Machiavelli's Prince. Which again, this is what's so interesting about this. Because Book 5 is a very all throughout Book 5 we have echo. Well, you'll feel like you're hearing the Prince. Later in book, the mechanisms of how to preserve the regime, and chapter 7 and 8, the 2 chapters about the mechanisms of preserving regimes, the 2 chapters that deal with the preserving regimes in general and in particular. In fact, this is unlike the difference. It's shocking that he breaks up the reason for change, or reason for political change in regimes, why regimes change. He goes in more detail. This is shocking in that sense, because in the discussion of that, he gives far more discussion. His account of change in oligarchy and changes in so-called aristocracy, and was in chapters 5, 6, and 7, are much more longer and in detail than his discussion of democracy. His discussion of democracy tends to be very brief, and that's why it's so shocking in that regard. So I'm interested in doing that theme about 2 themes: the small things, and small things are usually small things are usually things like, spiting me. You, and it has connections with higher things like honor, but it's small things. It's small matters. It's like the discussion that, biggest fights we often have is with our families and our situations are over trivial things. Like, you touched my glasses, or you didn't put the toilet paper up in the, this would be the big fights. Well, Aristotle makes this line that, well, revolutions happen not because of the small things, but the small things are the triggering moment by which that there's other issues aside, that this small thing is something echoing in there. There's some problem there is already there, and that this upset, or the issue of a small thing. In other words, like there's a dispute about marriages. He says that someone was not invited. You didn't invite the guy to the marriage. There was already a divide in the society, and you decided that you dishonored someone over there. You didn't think it was important enough. You already was showing dishonor and disrespect already that was already there. But this event here becomes the event that starts the crisis, the fighting, the factional conflict. And therefore, this is why small things matter. The small things are not they're not the real major cause, but they're the triggering cause. And they're the thing that usually sets the big things off. And this is what's so insightful about this. And I've, as a scholar, I noticed that there's not many people talking about that. I've been looking through all the books dealing with Aristotle on revolution, and it's not much. Both and also the force and fraud discussion at the end of chapter 4. That's not dealt with. So I have 2 articles I'm developing, and I'm going to get those done. I have an article already, a paper I gave last year at the Midwest Convention in Chicago on the accounts of regime change. I need to write another paper on preservation, the manual for preservation. But I have a very good outline. If you buy my a notebook for Aristotle's Politics, you'll see that there's a nice a graph about I have a wonderful outline of those 2 chapters where I highlight the mechanisms that Aristotle recommends for preservation. And it's a very good things you do avoid doing and things you do. In other words, there's some things you do and some things you avoid. Okay, and that's one of those things. That's a good chart in there. What else? Well, that's my thing. And the other thing I was thinking about last night, I was thinking about this whole regime question. And I'm saying, well, what is going on here? Why am I not paying attention to rewriting some more? And it's frustrating writing about this. I'm going to get the book done, the book on Aristotle's regime science. I think I'm going to write a grant proposal to see if I can get some money to hire an editor, and then start feeding the editor a manuscript so they can put it in some format. I'm going to really try to get book 5 done. I have to rewrite a little bit of chapter 1, and I'm going to have to edit, about chapter 1 and 2 and 3. That's the whole thing. The introduction of chapter in book 4, I most of book 4 completely completed. I have book 4 mostly completed, and this is the theme here in that sense. Book 4, books. If I want to look at my book, Aristotle's Regime Science, focus is basically on books 4, 5, and 6. This is the so-called practical science of Aristotle's practical science versus the idea science. And it's my contention, always has been, that even from my first book, which I did that book 3, I really dealt with my first book, Aristotle's Best Regime, where I look at book 3, and that's focusing on book 3 as the focusing point and central, even though I do address elements of book 1. I kind of address systemically book 7 and 8, because I have to talk about aristocracy, why aristocracy is not serious. And I kind of also tangentially, I address in the logic of book 3 why the mixed regime cannot be a regime, a separate regime in that sense. So therefore, that's what I've been kind of dealing with in that sense, and why I picked that as I did it. Um, what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the practical regime. Now, this is the big problem. Now, everyone wants to look. Remember, everyone remembers Aristotle before his sixfold constitutions, right? The sixfold regimes. And this is something that he addresses both. You find it. It's repeated first time. It's presented in uh, book 8, chapter 10 of the Nicomachean Ethics, where it's done there. But then, he doesn't call it politeico. He doesn't call them, it says one, few, many, for the common advantage and the ruler's advantage, right? The deficient, this is good, just regime, and then deficient or defective, right? Something defective or bad, and the defect is that it's seeking its own interest at the expense of the common. Now, this is that argument explaining that is only really dealt now for in the ethics. It's hinted at as this is a defect, but then he kind of changes the word for when he talks about democracy, and then says that democracy is the most moderate. He then says democracy is the most moderate elsewhere also. So in book 4 of the Politics, it is in book 3, chapter 7. Let's see. Let's see if book 3, chapters 6 and 7. Yeah, 6 gives us the discussion of mastery. We get the discussion of that we must do the investigation of mastery. It is 7 that we get the first account of the regime, the governing body, right? And it's we get the one, few, and many. The standard the sixfold criteria of regimes. This is book 3, chapter 7, right? Where he says of case that the rule of the one, the rule of the just regime, or the rule which is good for the common advantage, the utility of everyone, the common good. This is in that sense, right? The good that is shared by all of us together, common has been. This is of that, and its alternative is for the self-aggrandizement or the benefit of the ruler. Okay, that's defective. That's deficient. That's more despotic, and it therefore needs coercion to contain it because the people won't be willing to accept it. In that sense, the argument is there's going to be need for a coercion, and that the one, few, many. So I said it was the qualitative character. The quantitative character, one, few, many, and then the qualitative character, that whether it's for the common good, common advantage, or the self advantage of the ruler or the ruled, right? So we have there the criteria of the sixfold regimes, and then it basically at the end of 7, basically at the 7, 8, we have the problem here is that. Well, it's not the fewness of the regime that makes oligarchies for the rich, and that it's not, and that what happens here is what happens when the rich are many. Is that any less an oligarchy? And he says no. So therefore, the qualitative criteria of the regime for that say it's more important the claim of the regime. So in book 3, the argument seems to say it's not the qualitative gets deconstructed. In other words, the original typology deconstructs because the problem is that when you have when the poor are few, and they're ruling, that's still democracy. The perception is, but when the many, what really defines what defines oligarchy is richness, not fewness. So therefore, when the many are rich and they're ruling, that is still a oligarchy. It's not a democracy. And when the poor are few and they're ruling, that is a democracy and not a oligarchy. It is still run democratically in that sense. So there's something about, in other words, that the qualitative claim, the one few many, gets dismissed at one level in book 3, and instead, what the qualitative claim gets revision. So, what is this? Every regime has a specific qualitative claim, and it's that contestation. And the rest of the book, of book 3, it deals with that contestation. Now, everyone says, well, then why, if that thing happens like you say it did, why, therefore, in the beginning of in book 4, chapter 2, does he return to it? And he does do this. But that's because he's starting again. In book 4, he begins with, book 4 is a very interesting book because he begins again to some degree. And we ask, why does he need to begin again? And that's because he deals with the question of the regime from a different perspective rather than the theoretical perspective. He's dealing it from the level of praxis and the level of things, right? He goes, he talks again about he says all the arts and sciences have not risen to partial basis, but are complete with the respect to one type of thing. It belongs to the single one, this study that is fitting in the case of each type of thing. So it echoes the beginning of one that, the great, book 1, chapter 1 of Nicomachean Ethics, right? It has very much echo to the beginning of this. And then he has the question of what is the best, right? So then he has this whole discussion of what the best is. And then he goes, he starts it out, right away in the 3rd paragraph. He will go there, he says, so it's clear in regard to the regime, it belongs to the same science to study what is the best regime is and what quality it should have to be, and the one we would pray for above all, right? And the external things provided to have no implement. So therefore, there's no, in other words, the best regime. Which regime is fitting for which city? So therefore, what is the best regime we would pray for with external things providing element? That's the first criteria. The second one is what regime is fitting for what city, for perhaps impossible for many to obtain the best. So neither the one that is superior simply nor the one that is best that circumstances should allow to be overlooked by a good legislature and the political ruler in the true sense. And then thirdly, the regime based on a supposition, a hypothesis, right? Hypothesis, presupposition, the text Lord's translates as, but it's hypothesis. For any given regime should be studied with a view to determining how it both might arise individually and initially, and in what manner it might be preserved. So, the beginning of book 4, he promises what is best for each particular city, and then, okay, what about the regimes? Every regime that makes a proposition, a claim. Let's look at every regime's claim to see. In other words, he says, thirdly, the regime based on the proposition for any given regime should be studied with a view to determining how it might arise initially and in what manner it might be preserved for the longest time once in existence, right? And beside all these things, the regime that is most fitting for all cities should be recognized. So therefore, only after thinking these things out, you get this. But then what happens here? He then has this is chapter 1. He seems to suggest that, well, no, but this is a problem. This is not going to be that difficult. There's not the city of one. He says that, it's a weird chapter here. He says, he ends there with the saying that, thus, most of these who have expressed views concerning the regime, even if what they say is fine or beautiful in other respects, they are in error when it comes to what is useful. So therefore, he goes, the move is away from what is beautiful to what is useful. That is the frame of the practical science, in a sense. For one should study not only the best regime, but also the regime that is best possible. And similarly, also the regime that is easier and most attainable for all. So therefore, there's 3 criteria, not only the best regime, but the regime that is what? Twofold. It is the best regime, but also that is best possible. Best. So what is the best? What is the best possible? And then what else? What is the most attainable to all? Not that. That's another best. This echoes the different levels of what is best. Aristotle. Again, Aristotle is best. Okay. This is the why. The we're looking at the Aristotle, the best, the best, the best. Well, but best has different meanings. Best. What is simply best? What is best possible? In other words, what we would pray for without any external implements. Well, given those external implements or limits of reality, what is best possible? And then what is the most likely, given the reality of these situations here? Not even best, but what is most likely going to happen, right? This is how he then talks about this at this level. And then he does this. Now, it is then in that context in chapter 2, we repeat the link of 3:7, where he then once again gives us the sixfold typology. He goes now, and then that's paragraph 1 of chapter 2, using the numbered paragraphs of the older pre of the pre Stephanus. It's not Stephanus, but it's pre-Becker. Becker, Roman numbers. Becker's pre-Becker. It's the old edition. Probably the numbers are probably from the Morbic edition, that Morbic's translation in that sense of that. He goes that in the second one. He says, now that it's evident, it now is evident the deviations that is worse, which is second worst. In other words, he talks about the best, and then he talks about the worst, right? That is that we have the three things that are good. That he says kingship, aristocracy, and regime, repeating the the name of the third criteria, the many. The best of the many is the name common for everything, Politeia. So the Politeia called Politeia, right? And then the three deviations are from that is kingship from tyranny from kingship. This is the beginning 1:1. Oligarchy from aristocracy and democracy from regime. And since aristocracy and kingship has been spoken of now, because we know that it's been spoken of in that if we understand that this is the ordering. Clearly, book 7 and 8, traditional book 7 and 8 is talking, particularly book 7 is the regime that we would pray for. So this seems to suggest here that has been spoken of already. And kingship has been spoken of in the last 4 chapters of the dialogue and debate between kingship and law ends book 3. So therefore, we get this double. We know that it's been talked about. So therefore, maybe the practical science comes after the regime that's prayed for. We're contrary to the editions that we most of. In other words, this is the only person who puts it in that order. This is the Jaeger's reordering, or Schuschmehl's reordering also. The only translator who puts it in that order is Peter Simpson, and Peter Simpson's North Carolina translation of this is the only one that puts it in the alternative ordering. All the others follows the tradition, the traditional orderings. Like it is Simpson who breaks and puts he renumbers everything. That freaks people out to the end. But there's a good reason for this, because the text, we look at the text, there's justification. Here, this text element would justify reordering. And now, I'm not going to say we should reorder it. I think the question of order and why does he order is useful. I actually think maybe the traditional ordering, leaving the way the traditional ordering may be better, because maybe the discussion of the best regime, the aristocracy, was already discussed in book 3. So, in other words, that line about kingship, aristocracy, and kingship, because remember, aristocracy means aristocracy, rule of the best, and that was technically addressed in book 3 as well, and that a discussion of the political rule that is best, which is a regime under law, versus the Basileia, kingship, right? So therefore you have therefore maybe, and that the 7 and 8 argument is that there's another argument that we are given the prayer for only to after we seen book 3 and look at the practical regime, we can see the holes, the problems of what is argued prayer for, how impractical or not possible the book 7 regime is, or unchoiceworthy the book 7 regime is. So that's a very interesting thing in that regard. But back to this, what the evident regime, he says that, okay, and then he goes that the best of the deviations, right? He says tyranny is the worst, oligarchy is second worst, for aristocracy stands far from this regime, and democracy is the most moderate. So the second time he says this is in Nicomachean 8 as well, in that sense, right? So therefore we get this weird notion. But then this is even more interesting. So therefore we get 2, and then paragraph 3, we get where's 3? 3 is very close. It happens right in after democracy is the most moderate, and then the numerical paragraph 3, section 3 is mentioned in the older Roman edition, right? Now, the earlier thinkers expressed this view without looking through the that the earlier thinkers had expressed this view as well, though not without looking to the same we do. In this is Plato's Statesman. It says, Lord says, Plato's Statesman, right? So therefore, this is echoing Plato's Statesman here. He says, for he judged them all to be respectable, where there would be a good sort of oligarchy with, for example, as well as the other, with democracy as the worst, but the best of the bad sorts. But here we assert there are generally thought an error, and that it is not right to speak of one sort of oligarchy as better than another, but rather less bad. Right? This is the first time. So there, his argument is that, but he says, notice, instead of making this argument, he says, as regard to this judgment, let us dismiss the matter for the present. And instead, then what we do is get a new project. It is in paragraph 4, new paragraph, he says, we're going to dismiss this whole, therefore we dismiss the early typology, and we dismiss once again the kind of argument about this, about okay, the best of the worst, we can't say the best of the worst. Well, not only see people read that only, okay, this is, I'm putting aside the argument about best for, but also putting aside the new typology. Okay, the repeat of the new typology, it is set aside. And what is now presented here is a new plan for the rest of the book. And this is at paragraph 4, 5, and 6. We get a proposed structure of the whole remaining books of the politics, books 4, 5, and 6. He says the number and varieties of regimes, so the numbers of regimes and variety of regimes, if indeed there are several kinds of democracies and of oligarchies. Next, which is the most attainable and the most choice-worthy after the best regime, right? As if there is some aristocratic or finely, beautifully constituted, but fitting for most cities. So therefore, what is the most attainable city, right? Next, which of the others is choice-worthy for what city? For perhaps it is more necessary for some that oligarchy, and for others that more former of these things. And in what manner one wishing to establish these regimes. So therefore, again, it is this next paragraph 5 thing. I mean democracy and all kinds of other oligarchies. So we're going to establish this. So therefore, it's not about this, what is most choice-worthy for most cities, and then how we're going to establish it. That's going to be a very interesting point there, because this is the question of establishment. So that's the third criteria. And finally, and I've provided as far as possible concise treatment of all these matters, we must describe the sorts of destruction and preservation for regimes both in general and in case of each separately, and for the reasons for their doing in particular come about in accordance with the measure. The final thing is book 5. So why do we have book 6? Now, Schuschmel argues book 6 is that third category. it is that third next. That is why the establishment of regimes. Simpson argues it's an extra thing. It's there. It's one more time thinking about it. It's a kind of an addendum repeated. It's not. It's just one more. He repeats itself and like this. No, but I think Shushmiel and Hicks has outline. Now, Shushmiel and Hicks does not even. It's a commentary. The Shushmiel Hicks commentary is book 1, 2, and 3, and then he says 5 and 6, but he means 7 and 8. The best regime. He does not give a commentary in the Shushmiel and Hicks edition of these practical books. But in his outline of the whole politics, before he goes in his commentary, looking at 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and then later 4, which is 7 and 5, which is 8. He goes into a very specific, very detailed comment. He says that, listen, book 6 should really be at the end of book 4, where you get this account. So you have an account. He promises an account that he doesn't deliver. Because what happens? Even book 5 doesn't deliver that. We don't get a simple account in book 5 of preserving regimes and why regimes, what causes change in regimes and what causes preservation, and both in particular regimes. We start out with the discussion of that. Then we get a short discussion of preservation regime that is not as long and detailed and does not break down the different regimes. Okay, we get a general account, but then we also get specific ones all lumped together, more in general than in specific accounts, because that's 8. Was it 8? 8 and 9? Yeah, chapter 8, 9, and book 5. Then we get the weirdest thing happens is that then he just breaks off. In other words, remember in the cause of change in 5, 6, and 7, chapter 5, 6, and 7 of book 4, we get the weird thing. We get the discussion of democracy, change of why there's change in democracy, why there's change in oligarchy, and why there's change in so-called aristocracy and politeia. Okay, regime called regime. I talked about this already. But then we go preservation. We only get the present. We had a big discussion, 3 chapters, maybe 4 chapters in general. And then we get 3 chapters on specific regimes of change. But preservation, we only get 2 chapters. One's a general, and then there's not even a very specific ones by types. So it's supposed to be general and very specific. We don't get that much. And then the argument is that, well, in the discussion for change, he sometimes hints at things that could counter it. And actually in book 4, he deals with regimes itself. In book 4, he does similar things that, you can prevent some things from happening by doing certain things. So that is what I consider the kind of odd thing about it. That's why I think this is, for Aristotle, it is kind of a odd thing here. And then what happens? He gives a separate account of book 5, 10 and 11, chapter 10 and 11, is about monarchy, which is both kingship and tyranny. How cause the change in kingship and then tyranny? That's chapter 10, and chapter 11 is how to preserve both kingships and tyranny, and longer. The tyranny is longer, and there's 2 different sections on tyranny. How tyranny is normally done versus the better way of doing it. This is shocking, and people always say this is a very the book 5 is the most Machiavellian part of, let's say, of Aristotle. This is echoes of Machiavelli's Prince. I even argue that we can argue that chapter 10 and 11 of book 5 could be Aristotle's Prince in that sense. Aristotle's a discussion of the Prince. Now, what's so significant about this is, well, why is it important in this sense? Because twofold. One is that book 6 is, you get, it's 8 chapters only. It's very short of these things. Remember, there's 12 chapters in book 5, and there's 15 or 14. My eyes. Yeah, 16 chapters and 16 chapters in book 4. So book 4 is longer than 5, and book 6 is the shortest. But if 6 is really to be should be before book 5. Because remember, what is book 4? Book 4 is the regime at rest. It is the regime, the account of the regime. It's the recount of is trying to explain what the regime is, the variations, the sub-varieties of the regime and their sub-varieties. Then the question of what is practical. What is that line? It's what is. I should look at it. What is. The first varieties of regimes. Next, what is the most attainable and most choice-worthy of the best regime? And then what is the most choice-worthy for cities, would perhaps to that, in other words, that in 5, the third next, the first, the next, the second, and then the second next. That is the thing we could say is book 6. People say, well, that is really the discussion of, well, that is what is, how do we establish regime? Well, isn't that really book, get to my outline over here. It's chapters, chapters. The political institution chapters 14, 15, and 16, which we get the deliberative institutions, right? We get Thomas Lord says he divides book 4. He says the scope of study, and then the type of regimes 3 through 10, right? So we get the regime types 3 through 10, right? And then the best practical regime is 311, but that's problematic because I would argue that it's not the best practical regime. That's about the middle. That's the middle. And that also continues. And then his idea, what suits for cities, that 12 and 13 is, again, what is the regime that 11, 12, and 13 are more together than separate, because these are far more together than separate. And that's why the street laws. And therefore, the discussion of institutions, then what happens in book 6? Well, it's very simple. Book 6 is divided into chapter 1 is the discussion of regimes and institutions. So it's an institution thing. So we get the institutions at the end of book 4, and the beginning of book 6 regroup on institutions. Then 2 through 5 deals with how democracies and how varieties of democracy and how to establish them. And then chapter 6, book 6, and 7 deals with oligarchies and varieties of oligarchies. Again, repeating the varieties of oligarchy that was discussed, but more different. It's a different focus of it, where this book is more about social. Book 6 deals with more kind of the questions of the variety of the democracies, the different types of multitudes, and oligarchies, a different type of notables and elites. And the different structure. So therefore, in many ways, and therefore the oligarchy chapter is shorter. This is very interesting, that in the practical sense of the terms, that the account of establishing oligarchy, he spends more time establishing questions of how to establish democracy. He spends basically 2, 3, 4 chapters as discussing the establishment of democracy, but only 2 chapters, and they're kind of short chapters. about doing oligarchy. So oligarchy seems not to be as complicated from the point of view of founding it in regards to institutions. Where democracy, doing it well, requires a lot of care and attention to the varieties of institutions. And then last, you get a re-examining of the executive institutions again at chapters 8 of chapter 6. So again, you get a very much another account of institutions of the because remember it's in 414 is the deliberative institutions for 50 chapter 50 book in book 4 chapter 14 is deliberative institutions, deliberative offices. The 15 is the executive or the offices themselves, and then the deliberative, not deliberative, the adjudicative offices, judicial, it says here, in chapter 16. So this is why we're at the hour mark. This explains what goes on here, and what's so interesting about this is once we get into the end of book, in book 4 we get a weird thing. We start the account of democracy, but in book 4 chapter 4, we start the accounts of democracy. Right, this is that. But in book chapter 3, we get this idea that the regime is twofold. In other words, the regime that is dealt with is a twofold regime. So we got this weird problem. Because he says that, oh, no, it's really divided by wins. He has that really weird thing. He says the number of regimes is that there are, in other words, first of all, the number of first of all, he denies the first of all 6 categories. He says the reason there's a number of regimes is that there are a number of parts in the city. So that therefore, given the ruling, in the first place, we see all cities are composed of households, and that next says aggregation, as some are well off, some are poor, some are middling, and that the well off and the poor, there's always the armed and the unarmed element, and then we see people. There's a farming, marketing, and working element, and in these cases, there's notables. Two are different based on wealth and the extent of their property. So there's differences of there's a multitude, but there's also the poor and the rich, and the multitude and the notables. Right? This is these categories. These first is that but there's there's a middling sort, but then he says that the middling sort is what? This is and that is the well off and the poor. It doesn't. There's the armed and the unarmed. And then there's of the people, the multitude. There are the different types of multitudes, the farming, marketing, and working. And then we notice that there is the notable. There are those based on the wealth and their property, right? And then he goes, in ancient times, those cities whose power lay in horses were at oligarchies, where they used horses in war and their neighbors. And like this, he talks about this. For in further addition, based on wealth, that of the family, and that of what defines the notables, right? What defines wealth and notables? And then he goes, and finally, and based on virtue, and indeed whatever else is said to be part of the city in the discourse and aristocracy. For there we distinguish how many necessary parts in the city. Again, he says this is referred to. This is often referred to Book 3, Chapter 12. Which seems to be there, but it also seems to be a reference to chapter 7. So it can be either book 3, chapter 12, or book 7, chapter 7 through 9 as well. So therefore, it's double meaning. There's a double play. He says, for these parts take part in the regime, and in some cases more, and some fewer. So more and fewer, right? It is evident, therefore, that there must be necessary a number of regimes differing from one another in kind. And since these parts differ from one another kind, so therefore, in other words, the number of regimes equal number of parts. And then he gets into the weird at chapter 6. I'll just read he goes at paragraph. It's not chapter 6. It's chapter 3, paragraph 6 in the Old Latin number. There are necessary, therefore, many regimes as their arrangements based on the preeminence of the different parts. So that it's not just 6. There is a multitude of regimes. But then he says, but these are held to be two. But there are held to be two sorts of regimes, particularly, just in the case of the winds. Some, northern and southern. In other words, they regard aristocracy as a oligarchy on the grounds that it is the rule by the few, and the so-called regime as a kind of democracy, just as among the winds, the western is regarded as belonging to the northern and the eastern to the southern. It is similar also in the case of the harmonies. Some assert that they regard as being two kinds of these as well, Dorian and Pythagoreans. Others would modal arrangements they call Doric and Phrygic. So that he talks about the two pairs, two structures. The few and the wealthy and the few. So that therefore, what really defines oligarchy, in other words, politeia, called politeia, and so-called aristocracies, are few and many, right? But that's blurred. It blurs it distinguished. That's why in book 4, this is that weird aspect of book 4. Book 4, we get a nice. In other words, if Aristotle, we get a problem of lacking of water. What should have happened is, well, let's give all the regimes. Let's give the practical. Let's go democracy, oligarchy, aristocracy. We should have 5 chapters, right? Maybe kingship would be 6. If we're going to have this, right? If the old regime gets up there. But what happens? We get book 4. We get a weird discussion of the parts. Book 4 is long. Book 4, chapter 4, is long. He starts out democracy, then he gets a whole discussion of the multitude and the parts of the city, which is a big digression on the parts, which echoes the discussion of parts. It will have an invert, or something's missing in book 4, chapter 4. That is, if you compare it to what he says about the parts of the city in book 7, you see that the priests are there. The priests there's no priests mentioned. It's silent about priests in book 3, chapter 4, book 3. Book 4, I mean. So, what does this mean? This is a weird thing. I'm talking on this, and I'm in my hour 15. I should shut up. What I think it means is this. I think it means that there's this order. We get, therefore, the discussion of, finally, we get the 5 subtypes of varieties. Then he gives these account of oligarchies, and it's shorter, much shorter than the democracy discussion. Okay, this prefiguring it. Then we get in chapter 5. That's chapter 5. We get the oligarchies. We get 4 types of oligarchies, and it starts with the best and goes to the worst, right? And the last democracy, the 5th democracy, is the last democracy. It's the last democracy. It's the most like tyranny, he will say. And then what will happen is then the last oligarchy is the same thing, most like tyranny. It's tyrannical, its character. The first aristocrat, and that that's the weird thing. And then what happens in chapters 4, 5, and then 6? Chapter 6, we get he does it one more time. He gives the 4 types of not 5. And what happens is the first democracy disappears, and that the first democracy in the second reading is the second democracy in the first in 4:4. So you have this weird thing happening here, and then you have the 4. You have the 4 and 4 presenting 4 a review of this, and whereas the best and the worst 4 and the first of both are very similar to each other. The first with the farming democracy, where there's a minimal allotment, and the minimal allotment and the oligarchy are kind of very close to each other. So therefore, this is the intersection of the two. Is that these two are very close to each other. They're separate because one is more predominant, but the fewness dominates over the many. Okay, in that sense, that would differ some, but it's still more similar to each other because because what happens as the what those those of the many the, who participates increases in every level of the new democracy, and what happens in the oligarchy, who participates, diminishes continually. So that's where it ends. And then what happens? Well, if that's the practice, then we should get the same thing, and we should have that same repeat. This should be repeated, and for because the next chapter we're going to be talking about oligarchy and so-called aristocracy and polity, right? Politia, the regime called regime. Okay, then we should have the same structure. We should give the account of the varieties of so-called aristocracies, and you should follow the you should follow the okay if it's therefore the types of varieties of polity, and then the types. But no, it's blurred. It's never the next three chapters. We don't get a simple account of polity where there's varieties, and then all so-called aristocracies and the different varieties of that, and then a retelling of it, like echoing the thing. We would if there was a deliberative pattern. If this was deliberative pattern, it doesn't have a deliberative pattern. It doesn't happen. Something happens here. It doesn't happen. There's no deliberative pattern. In fact, everything is blurred together in these chapters. And then at chapter 10, so therefore, if 4, 5, and 6, we get only oligarchy, democracy and oligarchy. 7, 8, and 9, we covered the questions of so-called aristocracy and this, but no clear order. It doesn't have any of the same character. It blurs it, mixes it. I'm going to talk about this, but then how is this aristocracy? Why aren't there forms? It ends up being that blurring aristocracy is a blurring of what is called regime and aristocracy. These things get blurred, and that there's no clear patterns in that sense. I think even in there, I think there is a passage even that the people used to call what people call polity used to be called what we call people call polity today is what the ancients called democracy. So therefore, it's weird things that undercuts this uniqueness of the politeia called politeia. Weird in that sense, and so it is not the we don't get the full count. We don't get the same count. And then chapter 10 ends it, and all with tyranny. And tyranny is the left. You get tyranny, but it is the most awkward. It's a small chapter. It's doesn't really divide tyranny it doesn't really typify in the same way that oligarchy is typified. We don't get varieties of tyranny, except he suggests that we've already been shown the varieties of tyranny, that the last democracy and the last oligarchy are kind of like tyrannies, and that the rise of a single tyrant. And it's kind of more about the character of tyranny rather than the institutions and structures of tyranny. So we get a weird ending, and that brings us to 11, 12, and 13, which deals with this weird question of what is the best and what is the most fitting, okay? And therefore, what is and it leads us to the question of all regimes are mixed, because all regimes are blended. And therefore, what about chapter 11 gets the question of the mesos, the middle, the riddle of the middle, I say. Chapter 11 of book 4 is the riddle of the middle, and that gives us a real fundamental toothache, because it's not a regime. It's about the nature of all regimes and why the middling sort is essential. You can't have the extremes of poor. If the poor and the wealthy are extremes in the city and they're too dominant, what ends up happening is that the wealthy become too arrogant, too aggrandizing and destructive. And the many, again, this echoes Machiavelli to some great degree. It is that the mesos is not a middle class, but this is what I'm talking about. This is like the riddle of the middle. It's not that it's the middle class. It's not the bourgeoisie. It's about the multitude that has enough. It's sufficient in its resources. This is why you have to remember wealthy and poor plays on the nature of the word prior. Prior is means. So it's a prior is the poor. Those without means are the poor, and the ou prior, the well mean wealthy. Okay, the wealthy and the poor are. It's the thing that prefixes the prefix before prior. that shapes the dimension by which excessive wealth and poverty, absence, the alpha privative of it, a priori. And the mesos is those with means. The mesos, the middle, is those with means. The middle is the mesos. They have enough. They don't need. They're not wanting. They don't have excess. Therefore, they don't get arrogant. But they're more moderate in that sense. This is how the middle. This is the idea that this is sophosunes. They have sophosunes because they're not excessive. They don't become arrogant because they don't have excess. So chapter 11 is a very important chapter because then 12 and 13 become the key things because and this is the article I published recently about the so-called "this is not polity." Becomes about, well, how do you establish the regime? How establish what works best, and what balances best? How does it stabilize itself in that sense? And this may explain why there's no need to go that much more into. In other words, he's addressed the question in here in 12 and 13 about how do you kind of balance things. It's all about balancing things. And once you understand it's about balancing things, then you only have to reinforce that in book 5 and 8 and 9, chapter 8 and 9. That's why this is where the regime. Remember, in book 4 we get the regime at rest. We look at the regime at the rest, the politeia at that, and then in book 5 we see the regime in motion. Well, that's it. That's almost an hour and a half. I don't want to go too long. I've been too long already. This is a messing around on a Sunday thing. I know people have been out and out, and everyone's gone already. And so if anyone who sees it will see it live in that sense. I'm going to let people go on this thing and hope everything is all right. Well, take care and bye-bye. Before I go, like it. If you hit the like button, hit the like button. If you've seen it at the stage of this, if you didn't like it, you can say, no, I didn't like it. Put any questions you have, put in the question bar, and I will respond to them. You can see my social media links below, my academic media. You want to find a paper that I did on this, I'm talking about this recent paper, you can go check my academic media links. They're there. You want to help me help me do what I do, you can become a member through subscribe to our Patreon. It would help, or buy one of my books. Particularly, you want to buy my notebook. This would be worth doing. This little wonderful thing has the charts and graphs that helps you read it through Aristotle's Politics. This is almost like with my reading Aristotle's Politics and this, it's a fantastic course in it. And it's that I would even compete I'd say my Aristotle lecture, my course, my videos on this is a course on the politics, and very much worth reading in that sense. Along if you read the text and look at that as well. Now you can buy one of those books right there. It'd be good. Buy by Lulu would be better because I get them profit, not the bookstore. So that's it. Take care. This is just an experiment on a Sunday after lunchtime brunch. I'm going to go to dinner now because my wife is saying, "Where is he? What's going on? Why is it so late?" And I have to go to school tomorrow. I have work. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. See you later.